Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 15th of December, and as always, we encourage you to stay informed about your local weather conditions, no matter what part of Alaska you're watching from tonight. As always, the Alaska Weather Information Line is up and working for you anytime. 1-800-472-0391 is an easy way to get your forecast information over the phone. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska. One click will get you to your local weather forecast, or a click on the side will get you some information about the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit and flying weather forecasts around the entire state. A quick check on TAFs, as well as general aviation concerns, including turbulence, icing, and convection. Take a look at the River Forecast Center and the Alaska Sea Ice Program, as well as any of the images that you see here on the show tonight you can find on the TV section. Just look for the little link at the bottom of the screen. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is how you find me. Just drop me a note, send me a picture of what it looks like outside in your backyard, and I'd love to share it with everyone else on the show. Hope you're doing well tonight. Here's a look at what's going on across Southeast. We are still watching a winter storm warning working its way across the center and northern sections of Southeast and into the northern parts of the Lynn Canal as we go through tonight. The first step is the wind that's working through the southern outer coast, and then as that moves northward, running into more cold air, we start to see the snow developing, and we are watching for some high winds around Juneau. We did have wind on the south side of Juneau, I believe, reach up to about 78 miles per hour already today. That's just a gust, but a sign of what's to come as that continues working northward. Very powerful low here in the central and eastern Gulf is well organized and moving a lot of air over southeast. So that's the main issue as we head through tonight. So what do we have? We have a high wind warning here for the southern outer coast around Prince of Wales Island, including Craig, Klawock, and Heidelberg, and that'll bring in southeasterly winds up to about 40 miles an hour sustained and gusts to 60 miles per hour. That warning will continue until about 9 o'clock tonight. A little bit further north is the Juneau and Douglas areas, looking at northeasterly winds coming in up to 40 miles an hour sustained and gusts to 60 there. So in either one of these locations, you may have strong enough winds to push the trees around, hopefully not, but maybe knock out some power in some cases, and certainly push a lot of loose debris around. So a good idea, if you got a moment and the winds seem to settle down for a second, go out and check on the aircraft and the boats, make sure they're tied down and secured for sure. Up north, we have a winter storm warning that is in effect starting at around 4 o'clock through the will end at 4 o'clock tomorrow, I should say, and we're expecting as much as 10 to 20 inches of snow in that region. The good news is the wind that you've been having in Skagway and Haines will stop, and we expect that the snow will start after the wind stops. So they're not going to be a combined problem, but you may have some gusts up to about 40 miles an hour in that area before the wind settles down. It looks like 10 to 20 inches again. That'll reach down to about sea level for Haines and Skagway, and certainly on the highway. Snowfall rates could be around 1 inch an hour, which is amazingly meteorologically impressive, but really bad if you're trying to drive through that or get around. So just be prepared for some seriously wonderful and impressive southeast snow, but again, mind your manners out in it as well. Be careful out there. The yellow shade here is a winter weather advisory, so not quite a warning. Certainly one that should get your attention and may cause some travel troubles here and there around the Hyder area and the Misty Fjords region. But in general, we're looking at about 8 to 12 inches of snow, and that'll take us through about 6 o'clock tonight through about noon on Sunday for the Misty Fjords region and specifically Hyder. So a winter weather advisory for you. A lot going on in southeast. The weather's going to be kind of gnarly the next couple days as well. Probably not quite this bad, but if you're trying to fly or get around on the ship, it's going to get pretty bumpy and might even, will likely be pretty hard to do just because of the turbulence in the area, just because of the seas that are pretty rough out across the coast, and the wind and the visibility. Just a general problem for everyone. Here's a look at the satellite picture this afternoon. The main low is still sitting here across the central and eastern Gulf, and it's wrapping around and controlling all the weather in the coastal areas of the Gulf of Alaska and pushing moisture further and further north. So as it runs into the cold, we're getting some light snow across the interior, and we're pulling in all of this deep cold from the Arctic, which is great news if you're looking for ice around the Bering Strait. It's filling in short order there. Ice all the way down to around Little Diomede and filling in quickly around St. Lawrence Island and some of the outer coast. It looks like the Chukchi may be frozen up at this point. Not a lot of really good, thick, solid ice for the season, but it certainly looks like it could be covered up, some of that open water there. So the other thing we're noticing is convection here. We've seen some lightning strikes across the region today. A lot of these bright white clouds are creating shower and even some thunderstorm activity. So there certainly is some pretty healthy rainfall and snowfall rates there as that is running into the cold air. A look out to the west shows cloud cover across the Bering, some breaks in the clouds, and then the next wave of weather coming in across the central and western chain. The first push of that already has one front breaking up. We can see another one forming there, that low at 972 millibars. High pressure across eastern Asia, dragging in that colder air across the Bering. And then we're sitting around the Gulf of Alaska, and our low pressure system this afternoon is about as low as 961 millibars, which is not as bad as it was yesterday, but it's still in the territory of, yeah, you should probably pay attention to this kind of weather. As you look at southeast, notice how these lines are just crushed together here. That means an awful lot of wind is moving through this very tight space, and that continues up around the Copper River Delta and then over Kodiak Island. Now, the worst of it is certainly across southeast, but we are getting some of those impacts here across south central and Prince William Sound. Pretty rough weather there across most of the Gulf. And it looks like tonight the snow is really going to pick up across northern parts of southeast. Again, snow was seen around Angoon earlier this afternoon, so that line was moving northward fairly quickly, and the wind was still blowing across southern parts of southeast. So we expect that to be the story as we go through tonight and at least through early tomorrow for many sections of the Panhandle. Low pressure is going to kind of wobble around here in most of the Gulf for the rest of the weekend and into early next week, and it is going to push some colder air and wet weather across the Kenai Peninsula. So another round of snow is likely going to develop as we head into your Sunday around South Central and Anchorage and the Kenai Peninsula and into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys there. Some of the worst of that and the heavier snowfall will probably be up in the Chugach and certainly around the Haines and Skagway area as we start up tomorrow. But as that low pressure gets closer, it's also going to push snow into Kodiak Island and over the Barrens and over the southern parts of the Kenai Peninsula and up against the Alaska Range. So if your plans are anywhere on the road system in South Central, be prepared for changing weather there. Across the Yukon Flats, areas of light snow around Fort Yukon all the way down toward Eagle as we get into the afternoon. We are going to see some healthy breaks in the clouds as you head out to the west. When we get into the aviation section here in a minute, keep your eyes open for that widespread VFR starting to break out. Not the case up north, though. We do expect to see areas of freezing fog and out across the south. And the western sections of the Bering, we do expect to see some light snowfall, and some of that will be reaching through Diomede and St. Lawrence Island as we go through the rest of the weekend. The next push of weather coming in from the south will quickly move off to the east and join forces here across the Gulf as we get into Monday, and that's going to keep wind focused across especially the southern outer coast of southeast and maybe as far north as the central parts of southeast, so the winds aren't going to go away for you very quickly. That colder push moving through south central means more snow across the region as we start up into the week, and probably some breezy, if not blustery, conditions across the eastern chain and the Alaska Peninsula with snow showers there and snow falling across some of our Brooks Range passes and some of our favorite places on the south side into areas around the Seward Peninsula, the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, and the Koyukuk Valley like Galena. Let's take a look at temperatures quickly by tomorrow morning. 30s and 40s for southeast, teens and 20s for south central. Temps well below zero in the interior and northward, as cold as 35 to 40 below, with high temperatures tomorrow only 20 below, 2 below in Tanana, and 20s and 30s for south central.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation weather, the focus for low ceilings and a lot of low visibility is going to be out across the Gulf of Alaska, the north and western areas, and especially across southeastern Alaska with several waves of weather working through. Turbulence, icing, and low ceilings and viz are going to be the main issues for Sunday morning. And we're also watching for convection across the eastern Gulf. Up north, marginal areas will rule the roost north of Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, maybe even over the passes at times in the morning. Look for IFR conditions around the Chukchi coast and inland somewhat, but again, mainly north of the Brooks Range. Out across the middle Yukon Valley and into the upper Kuskokwim, we may see some marginal conditions, and of course across the western coastlines into Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and most of the chain. As we get into the afternoon, IFR expands across the outer coast into the northern sections of the Chilkoot and White Pass. Snow is expected to continue in those areas. areas. Look for IFR across Prince William Sound and most of the eastern Kenai Peninsula, hit and miss around the Alaska Peninsula and south of Kodiak Island toward AKwx. And then in the same places around the Chukchi Coast, we'll see IFR continuing there with marginal conditions more widespread than anything else. But the interior should be generally VFR for your Sunday afternoon, all the way from the upper end of the Yukon down toward the Delta, and looks like Bristol Bay, mainly marginal conditions, with most of the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula also holding at marginal levels. As we get into Monday morning, IFR is going to spread across the Kenai Peninsula up into the Susitna Valley a little bit more, Prince William Sound all the way into southeast again, and we'll see some patchy areas of MVFR across the central parts of the Panhandle. But once we get into the afternoon, some of that should move around a little bit more. We'll see more widespread IFR in the north, and then filling in a little bit further southward with some patchy areas of MVFR south of Port Alexander up to Sitka, and maybe down toward Craig and Metlakatla. As we get up toward the northern part of the Gulf, IFR should be fairly persistent, especially east of Cordova, over Anchorage, northern parts of Cook Inlet into Turnagain Arm and the Knik Arm, and up to Susitna Valley. And watch for IFR to spread inland across the Koyukuk Valley and down into the lower and middle Yukon, and also across the North Slope. But the actual coastal locations probably dealing more with MVFR than anything else, and the West Coast locations won't see much of a change. Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, we expect to see a lean over to marginal conditions as we go through your Sunday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look to be pretty good. Rainy Pass heading for VFR, but a marginal start in the morning, and we expect similar conditions there at Windy Pass. Marginal conditions to start. Isabel Pass also starting at MVFR throughout the day. VFR develops. Mentasta Pass looking pretty good Sunday. Tanita Pass looks like we'll get over to marginal conditions as the afternoon goes on. Portage going from marginal to IFR, especially on the eastern side, and Chilkoot and White Pass with snow in the region. It is going to be an IFR kind of day. Surface freezing line shows that warm, wet air sneaking its way up the outer coast and southern parts of southeast for Sunday morning, but most of the state sees little change with the surface freezing line staying in place over southeast, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and then all the way out toward Nikolsky and south of the Pribilofs for your Sunday. Icing potential is also focusing on that broad area of low pressure across the eastern Gulf. Levels above 2,000 feet, mainly from about McGrath down toward Lake Iliamna and Kodiak Island, rising a little bit into the Copper River Valley to about 3,000 feet and above, and then for southeast above 5,000 feet there with moisture and cold air working across the region. There's also a hint of the next wave showing up across the western Aleutians above 2,000 feet. For all regions there, generally isolated moderate is expected, but there may be some thin patches of considerable moderate icing potential across the north and eastern Gulf Coast, especially in the vicinity of the front. As we look at the jet stream, that powerful river of air has not changed a whole lot. It is just staying put across the North Pacific, anywhere from 140 to about 160 knots at its peak. But we also have that colder channel of air moving in, and with that, wind speeds up to 50 to 55 knots, 75 knots in fact across the North Slope. And all of that is keeping a very powerful flow of weather centered up in the Gulf, and that southerly stream of moisture interacting with the cold right over the mainland and southeast. At 9,000 feet, you can see winds coming in from the south and southeast, 40 to 50 knots. And over the Gulf, anywhere from 15 to 20 moving over the Kenai Peninsula. The North Slope, 10 knots there. And then the backside of the system, northerlies, 20 to 35 all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula. The next system gearing up out in the west with wind speeds up to 40 knots from the south. At 3,000 feet, that storm really hasn't quite made the impact yet to the west, but the northerly winds are going strong, 15 to 35 across the west. You can see a little bit of a stronger flow across Kodiak Island. Southerlies in force there at 50 knots over the outer coast of southeast and south central, and the inside interior looking at about 10 to 25 knots. Turbulence is going to focus exactly where it did for yesterday. Tomorrow looking 4,000 to 6,000 feet with isolated severe in the northern and eastern Gulf Coast, 4,000 feet in the west. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Toman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern, looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. How, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And on to your sea ice report for the day, the 15th, we are looking at even more ice across Chukchi Sea now. It looks like all the marginal ice has been moved out there. It looks like the Alaska Sea Ice Program had a pretty good view of the area around the Bering Strait. There were a little more cloud cover today, so it wasn't exactly sure that all of that area that was open water, or at least, mostly open water, has become all 80% concentration, but pretty good confidence that that's the case. Around Little Diomede, still filling in on the east and south side there. You can see the island right there. And then north of St. Lawrence Island, the ice continues to move closer and closer to the coast and fill in that concentration there. Generally east of the island out toward Nome, there's still a large area of open water, but with the continued weather pattern as it is, that will be moving to at least some marginal ice, if not a little bit higher concentration as we go through the rest of the week. So good news there, and that reduces the threat of heavy freezing spray across the region. So that is really good news, but it's still a threat for right now, so we're watching that carefully. Across southeast, the winds are going to howl again tomorrow, anywhere from 25 to 35 knots on the inside, northerlies in the Lynn Canal with 5-foot seas there and 13-foot seas across the Clarence Strait. But look at the stronger winds here. South of Sitka to Craig, you're looking at 35 to 40 knots. Sustained, 45 I should say, and 26-foot seas. So strong gales at least across the outer coast will continue, and those higher winds all the way up into the northern Gulf with Prince William Sound and the Yakutat region looking at 25 to 26 footers. For Monday, the winds come down just a little bit. Northerlies extend into the Stevens Passage region, 4-foot seas there, 7-foot seas in the Clarence Strait, and 25 to 30 knot winds sustained across the outer coast. You're looking at 15 to 17-foot seas, and the winds coming down a little bit more to your south as well. So some improvement there, but the winds will be staying with us as the low isn't going away just yet. Easterlies across the northern Gulf and into Prince William Sound, 30 to 35 knots on either side of Hitchinbrook entrance tomorrow. But look at the difference in the seas, of course. 21 to 23 footers there across the northern Gulf, 21-foot seas outside of the Barrens, 12-foot seas west of the Barrens, and north and easterly winds coming down Cook Inlet with 6 to 12-foot seas expected in the region. And we're also starting to see some ice growing across the Turnagain Arm region and the Knik Arm as we get into the end of the weekend here. Across across Prince William Sound, southeasterly winds are expected for Monday. 4-foot seas there and 11 to 12-foot seas across the open waters of the Gulf. Looking for west and southwesterlies to develop across Cook Inlet with southerly flow in the northern Cook Inlet region there. 4-foot seas there outside of Kashamak Bay. 5 to 12 foot seas growing there, with the highest there around the Barrens. Northwesterlies will be strong and gusty tomorrow in Shelikof Strait. A gust of 50 knots is expected at least through Sunday afternoon. 7 foot seas there, 22 foot seas east of Kodiak Island, 14 to 19 foot seas down the coast, and 6 to 10 foot seas across the Bering Sea coast with a northerly wind, 25 to 30. Look for those to shift a little bit more to a northwesterly direction on Monday. 25 to 30 knot winds on either side of Kodiak Island, 6 foot seas in Shelikof Strait, 12 to 14 foot seas down the Pacific coast, and 9 to 12 foot seas growing across the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula Monday. A north and easterly wind will be blowing for the central and eastern chain, 25 to 35 knots there for your Sunday. 11 to 16 foot seas, the highest of which will be south of Atka. As you move westward, we're getting back into more of a northerly flow. 10 to 15 foot seas expected with a 20 to 30 knot wind. That becomes westerly as we head into Monday, and we get back into that northwesterly blow that's coming in around high pressure that's trying to work its way into the Gulf and feeding that low pressure system a little bit further east. 25 knots in most areas there. That'll give us 13 to 14 foot seas for the Pacific coast and 9 to 11 foot seas for the Bering Sea coast as we get into your Monday. For the west coast, northerlies coming out of Norton Sound and over St. Lawrence Island at 25 knots. That'll be the strongest. You'll probably get into some stronger winds south of Eatolan Strait and the Kuskokwim Delta, 7 foot seas there. Northeasterlies into St. Paul and St. George. You'll see some stronger winds for Monday, a northwesterly flow, 25 to 30 in most areas, and seas coming down to about 10 feet. For the North Slope, easterlies over the ice, 10 to 15 for the Beaufort and 10 to 20 over the Chukchi Sea, 25 knots again around the Bering Strait, and 9 foot seas into St. Lawrence Island for Monday. Again, more ice is better weather for you because heavy freezing spray will still be an issue until that freezes up. Let's take a look at the rest of tonight's weather. Winter storm warnings continue for the north around the Haines and Skagway areas and the highways included. Winter weather advisory for the Misty Fjords region and Hyder. And we're looking at high wind warnings for the outer southwestern coast of southeastern Alaska for Craig, Klawock, and Heidelberg with gusts to 60 until 9 o'clock. And high wind warnings continue for the Juneau and Douglas Island area as well, with some improvement as we go into tomorrow. Be safe, everyone. See you tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.